I admit that everybody is inside, so distinguished guests and ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, good evening to Japan. My name is Alexandra Palkova, and I'm from Latvian Institute of International Affairs, and it's an honor to host this event today. First of all, let me thank you, the Embassy of Japan and Latvian Institute of International Affairs for close collaboration and possibility to organize an event about Japan and EU connectivity in modern world. As first, I would like to give a floor for Professor Andrew Sprutz, Director of Latvian Institute of International Affairs. Professor Sprutz, the floor is yours.
Alexandra, thank you so much for introduction. Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Watanabe, dear colleagues, dear students, dear friends, of course, it's a pleasure and honor to say a few introductory words today, because of course the main highlight is lecture by Mr. Watanabe, so I think I will be very, very short. I can say personally that Japan is very close to my heart. I was a visiting scholar at Japan's Institute of Energy Economics some years ago for a few months, but we continued cooperation also with the Japanese International Affairs Institute. And I can always stress that it was extremely enriching experience. And of course, I believe that these are cooperations, friendships, which should be continued. And of course, this event, today's event, is a good additional motivator to continue our enriching experiences, cooperation and friendship. And I hope that this is one of the first steps also cooperating with embassy, but certainly not the last ones. If we speak more on general, on societal and international level, I would say we are different as societies, but certainly there are quite a number of considerable commonalities. We are democratic societies, we are democracies, and democracies are facing some challenges, to put it mildly, in contemporary global system. So there is some sort of authoritarianism on the rise. So I think that the democratic appeal, democratic cooperation always could be strengthened. Democracy is a never-ending process, and also cooperation among democracies is a never-ending process. To some extent, I would also dare to say that we are small countries. Of course, Japan is large in terms of economy. It's large also in terms of size of population. But if we define smallness or largeness in a comparative perspective in comparison to someone else, then of course we have neighbors which are larger, especially Poland, Germany, and especially Russia on one side. And I guess also for Japan, there is big countries, above all China, in the Pacific region with also quite large ambitions. And that's, I think, also adds to this feeling, or might add to the feelings, that as a smaller societies in comparison to other ones, we have to also act in a way and use our advantages and develop especially our own resiliences. And I think exactly we have an ambition to be resilient as democracies. We are willing to be technologically, and not only technologically, advanced societies. And this certainly unites Latvia and Japan. And I think we are very happy also today for this discussion on connectivity, because connectivity is indispensable, and especially connectivity of knowledge, connectivity of ideas, connectivity of best practices. This allows us to reflect and basically develop our own societies in a frame of cooperation. Connectivity of knowledge also has already motivated us here in the Baltics, in Latvia, to look beyond the region. We've been quite region-focused, Russia, the Baltic region, the transatlantic area, but Asia certainly is increasingly important for Latvia. What happens in Asia, cooperation with Asian countries certainly influences us. We understand we understand that increasingly. And we have also a program at the Latvian Institute of International Affairs, which is Asia program. So we put emphasis on cooperation on also sharing the mutual understanding. So the connectivity, cooperation, mutual knowledge, and understanding with Japan, who is very important player in the Pacific and globally, is very important for Latvia and those who are willing to shape Latvian politics. And certainly also our students are willing to shape Latvian politics. And that's why this shared discussion and sharing of knowledge on how we connect between the EU, Europe, and Japan, between Latvia and Japan, I think is very timely and very important. So I wish from my side an informative lecture and certainly very dynamic exchange of thoughts. And I encourage once more the colleagues, participants, students to share their thoughts, to share their comments and questions also with our distinguished speaker today, Mr. Watanabe. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And as a follow-up to Professor Sprouts, let me invite the Ambassador Kawaguchi. Kawaguchi taisi wa soredewa anata no senmon tishiki and watachi shitachi ni kyoshite kudasai.
Thank you. Lavdian, SS Kawaguchi, Japanas Westernix, Latvia. Thank you very much, Professor Sprouts, for your kind and inspiring introduction and hosting today's event. And thank you, Japanese or moderators. Good afternoon, everyone online. Please let me welcome you all. Thank you for joining us. Before inviting Mr. Watanabe to deliver his lecture, let me briefly share my thoughts on this event. Japan is located in the Far East. Tokyo is 8,000 kilometers away from Riga with 7-hour time difference. So connectivity is crucial for our bilateral relations. Despite the distance, however, the recent event on the 26th of January reminds us that Japan played a significant role in the decisive moment in the history of Latvia. Japan was one of the 5 countries, Entente, that granted international de jure recognition to Latvia 100 years ago. Besides, 2 countries, Latvia and Japan, share a lot in common. First, we have a big immediate neighbor in common. There's only one country between us. Second, the relation with the EU and NATO, the United States in particular, are the central pillar of our foreign policy. Third, most importantly, we adhere to fundamental values and principles such as democracy, the rule of law, human rights, and sustainability. So I feel regret that there are very few opportunities to discuss Japanese foreign policy here in Riga. Recently, the move to strengthen connectivity between Japan and the EU is accelerating. After Japan, EU, SPA, and EPA, the document on the partnership on sustainable connectivity and quality infrastructure are signed in 2019 between former Prime Minister Abe and President Juncker. Lots of discussions are now going on in Brussels. The EU and its member states have started the discussion on its strategy on the Indo-Pacific. Germany and Netherlands published their respective guidelines on Indo-Pacific following France. Many countries in the world, including Africa, Latin America, increasingly express their support for the Japanese vision of free and open Indo-Pacific. I believe this is a perfect time to initiate a discussion on these topics in Riga. I want to express my sincere appreciation to Professor Spruce and the moderator, Ms. Palkova, and their colleagues to make this happen. Thank you. Today's speaker, Mr. Tsuneo Watanabe, is a political scientist and highly influential opinion leader in Japan. He has an extensive career in think tank, both in Washington, D.C. and in Tokyo. I shared the time with him 2 decades ago after 9/11 in Washington, D.C. Back then, Mr. Watanabe was highly active in CSIS. One of the things there, and also active, but to have free lunch at think tank events. It is a great pleasure to listen to him in Riga after a long time. I know his lecture today will be stimulating for all of us. I look forward to a lively and fruitful discussion. Paldies.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. And now, as for the agenda of today, we will start with a keynote speech from Mr. Watanabe, and then we will have questions and answer session where I'm hoping to hear a lot of questions from the audience. So as for now, as the Ambassador introduced Mr. Tsuneo Watanabe, I can only add that Mr. Tsuneo, the Zoom is yours. So let's start.
Thank you very much. The very kind introduction of both Professor Spruce and Ambassador Kawaguchi, and appreciated the moderating role of Ms. Parkova. Thank you. And also very good opportunity to talk, even over the online. I was originally supposed to visit Riga last year, February. Without COVID, I could have been there already and enjoyed staying in Latvia. Unfortunately, not yet. In the future, clearly I will visit your country, definitely. So it's nice to talk before. So that's easier for me to have many friends there, and I could enjoy the visiting. My introduction, introduction described me as a political scientist working in think tank. Especially I spent 10 years in the Washington think tank Center for Strategic and International Studies. And many experts, both Republican and Democrats. But now many my friends join Biden administration, both Asia experts and European experts. That would be nice for me too. And Ambassador Kawaguchi already explained to you. So I happen to be with Ambassador Kawaguchi was the embassy of Japan in Washington, D.C. So it's a nice connection. Connectivity, the best connection is an interpersonal connection that makes a lot of diplomacy, alliance, commercial economy, many things. So, what I've tried to is what Japan wants to this new old world with a more new type of connectivity, this kind of a digital, but also combined with old human beings, and what kind of a world Japan wants and what kind of effort Japan is making. That's what I try to talk. Let me first upload my PowerPoint. Okay, let me go to first one. Of course, that's shake hands. Now Japan and the EU. Unfortunately, now even we cannot shake hands due to the COVID-19. But this picture is coming from the EU-Japan Strategic Partnership Agreement. And by the way, it's called the SPA, EU-Japan. Did you know? I'm sure not so many people don't know. If I ask the Japanese people, do you know EU-Japan SPA, probably not many people answered yes. If we ask the EPA, Economic Partnership Agreement, probably more people are familiar with. But EU-Japan SPA was signed in 2018, as well as EPA, Economic Partnership Agreement. Very important agreement because that agreement will serve as a legal base for the promoting a cooperation on matters of a mutual interest in a wider range of areas between Japan and the European Union, as well as member states. That means not only Japan and the EU, Japan and Latvia too. And that share values and the principle of democracy, rule of law, human rights, and the fundamental freedoms. So I think this kind of a manifest for cooperation and the legal base for cooperation was very important. And you know what? I think that's kind of a base. And based on this agreement and idea, we mean the Japan and the Latvian and the many EU countries find a way how to cooperate with. That sign up was a pretty good timing at 2018, 2 years ago, and with EU leadership and Japanese leadership. Why? I explain later, but clearly after US Trump administration, I'm sure the European friends are worried about US detachment from alliance or even the cooperation with Europe. Same thing may apply to the Asian allies too. Fortunately, brave Prime Minister Abe tried to have a closer relation with President Trump and successful. But at the same time, Japan is always wondering how much the US is really trying to make a promise for their alliance and what kind of cooperation they expect the all allied partners. I'm sure that's concern of all US allies and the partnership country. Agenda of the EU-Japan SPA. That's very wide range of this. The civil protection from natural disaster, terrorism, pandemic, or military conflict. Recently, COVID-19 cooperation between the EU and Japan has been active. And cybersecurity cooperation, that's very active, especially, your neighbor, Estonia is a country who is advanced in cybersecurity. Japan, Estonia, cybersecurity cooperation has been very advanced. Economic security already. Clearly, EU and Japan has a long history to cooperate on economy, how to secure the current economic situation, and including some trade agreements such as EPA, Economic Partnership Agreement. That's not only trade, but investment and economic standard setting. Non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. That's very serious area too. That's security area and terrorism, organized crime, climate change and energy security, yes. That's the Japan EU has been working on very hard. And military relations such as anti-piracy operation in the Indian Ocean and the Gulf of Aden. That's some people are not so familiar with this activity, but Japan is keep sending maritime self-defense forces to that area, and EU and NATO members countries are sending troops there. It's not my job to explain everything, but I'd like you to figure out the variety of agenda Japan and EU and Japan and Latvia could tackle on in the future. Again, this is a platform, and this is not the promised one. I think just based on this agenda, we will cultivate what kind of cooperation we will do in the future. That's blueprint. and direction. That's, I go too much. So, you know, all interest is clearly the current liberal order, international liberal order, how to maintain liberal order, and you know, the rise of China, that's current trend, and China tend to ignore the international rule, common rule. That's worried, the shared worried with first the United States or Asian neighbor. But at the same time, of course, the other worry is the resurgence of militant Russia. That is also worried by the many neighbors, especially the European, but not only European, Japan too. As Ambassador Kawaguchi suggested, there's one country between Latvia and Japan, and Russia's resurgence is very impressive to the, of course, the European border too. But our border, that's Asian border, is also that is the we could work on together. And another issue is the United States. What's wrong with the United States? Oh, you know, the Trump administration was controversial. What's wrong with Mr. Trump? I think James Mattis, former Defense Secretary Trump administration, says that Donald Trump is the first president in my lifetime who doesn't try to unite American people, doesn't even pretend to try. Instead, he tries to divide us. That's very strong one. By the way, you know, I'm a big fan of James Mattis. He's a great guy who really appreciated the US-Japan bilateral alliance. And my European friends happen to work in NATO, also appreciated the role of Jim Mattis when he was a Secretary of Defense, and he visited the NATO summit, and he tried to connect all members, despite of the attitude of Mr. Trump was not so seriously tried to connect. This is a Mattis. Another case is John Bolton, former National Security Advisor to Mr. Trump. Every president takes politics into account in making their decision. National security, domestic policy, difference with Trump is that the politics of getting re-elected predominate over every other issue. He doesn't follow the strategic doctrine. He doesn't really think in the policy term the way we normally mean that. He thinks in terms of Donald Trump. No, he said he's not only America first, he's a seriously Trump first. Oop. That's Bolton. You know, natural consequence is kind of the gravity of a U.S. leadership is getting weaker. And I'm sure what kind of drink and cheering with two leaders, maybe Baiju, Chinese leader, or maybe vodka. I know that is a case. So what I'm trying to explain is that Japan is a country, one of the countries who really worried about leadership vacuum, because US is a very inward looking at that time. You know, I don't blame Mr. Trump. I think even before Mr. Trump, President Obama showing less burden and asking other leaders to have a shared burden. That's continue with the Mr. Biden too. For example, in the Foreign Affairs Journal, Mr. Biden wrote, he was proud of the asking NATO members to share the 2% of GDP. Mr. Trump pretended to play he made it, but reality is that President Obama and Vice President Biden made it. So that's clear. And he said that he was proud of. So Japan, think about what Japan can do for kind of very wild and wild situation in the world, and contribute to the maintain peace and prosperity. And Mr. Abe, Prime Minister Abe's the idea is free and open in the Pacific. That is, Japan tried to contribute to the public goods for the stability and the prosperity in the region. Oh, I forgot this one. This is a fake one. It's not real people. But, you know, even the North Korean leader seems to enjoy the US leader is not so seriously taking a situation and inward looking. You know, if Mr. Trump was elected, probably accelerate the decline of the US leadership, growing division in the US. Either the election is possible, US-China new Cold War, serious one, or Mr. Trump is trying to deal with Mr. Xi Jinping. We never know. The very, very extreme case we could imagine. Or continue to ignore advisor, Congress, allied partner, democratic value. But, you know, now the world with Biden, no, maybe better than Trump, but it seems me US direction is not so drastically changing. He may try to slow the decline of the US leadership. Well, however, growing division in the US continues. And he continued to have a tough stance on China. There's some room for the cooperation, such as climate change. That's not bad things, but a very different attitude. And respect experts' advice, yes. And Congress, allied and democracy, that's good news. And tough on Russia, that's good news. And tough on abuse of human rights and the democratic value would be appreciated. That's good things. But anyway, my sense is U.S. inward-looking nature is a very structural. Structure means U.S. cannot afford to have a world policeman, unlike 50s and 60s, because at that time U.S. economy was so big, and the U.S. military power was so advantageous. Now, rivalry is try to catch up, but not only economic area, military area, but you know, the relative decline of U.S. primacy. But at the same time, I'm sure no country, even China, cannot catch up the United States soon. So that is the situation. So Japan decided to maintain the current world order. In other words, status quo. So Japan already started in the idea to maintain the world order. Happened COVID-19 now by Richard Hurst, Chairman Council on Foreign Relations. He said pandemic will accelerate history rather than reshape it. That means probably after COVID-19, China economy is relatively free, safe, free from depression, and got out of the serious infection. However, I don't think, he doesn't think that China is taking hegemony, at least not yet. The end of China's leadership, that's not the case. End of globalization, people complain, but I don't think globalization will end. New age of global cooperation is coming too. He is not so optimistic. Probably existing trend continue with acceleration, decline of the US leadership, hollow international cooperation at the global level, competitive relation of major powers, that is a pessimistic and realistic view of Richard Haas. I somehow agree with this. But at the same time, probably the like-minded partner of United States could change. That's Japan's idea for the free and open Indo-Pacific. And current situation is resembled with the end of First World War I, wariness and inward-looking US. That was immediately after World War I. By the way, after World War I was just after the Spanish flu. So the people are tired of not only war, but infection, pandemic. And but at the same time, violence-leaning soldiers who fought a war. So it's a very contradictory reaction. Appeasement to fascism and sympathy to fascism. That's both happening even in the United States. I think in the US, Franklin Roosevelt really tried to make the alliance with a European country against fascism. But in the United States, some part of anti-interventionist, famous aviator Charles Lindbergh is a spokesperson for the America First Committee. And he has some sympathy with Adolf Hitler. So some conflict within a society in the United States after World War I. And this divided political group, Wilsonian versus America First, is eventually non-participation in the League of Nations. League of Nations was created by the US President Wilson. However, US didn't join because Congress didn't like it. So, now, after COVID-19 and after Trump, world, what's going on America First? What's going on Tea Party like a small government dogma? Probably US-China new Cold War, maybe not. That's up to us how to behave. And New Deal of the 21st century, maybe. Now the President Biden is trying to pass the largest stimulus package, $2 trillion. Now, Republican Congress doesn't like it. We are watching. But it seems to me that big package would be passed. But that's we never know. But according to the current higher stock prices, market is expecting to. Japan, thinking of this, how we survive, how we shape the situation surrounding Japan, especially the Indo-Pacific area. Dependence on the US military presence and alliance with the US? Yes, we'd like to maintain this. However, probably that's not enough. Dependence on the supply chain in China? We still continue to have a business with China. Yes, we need to. However, we cannot depend on two only. We need to think of a new creative thinking. That is a free and open Indo-Pacific initiative of Japan. Middle power cooperation, especially with Australia, India, ASEAN, Canada, and Europe. Potentially, we'd like to cooperate with South Korea too. Unfortunately, bilateral relation is not so good, but I keep telling my friend in South Korea, we need to work together. And also, we need to strategic review of the supply chain. That means probably we cannot heavily depend on the Chinese economy. But at the same time, we need to engage in China, both. So that's not decoupling of Chinese economy. Probably US and the US allied think of limited decoupling, or we call the partial disengagement. That's try to stop the inflow of critical technology, which could affect to the military balance. But at the same time, we continue to have a business as usual because the Chinese market is still attractive. You know, that is a new world. Before Trump or before Obama, probably we didn't have to worry about too much Chinese. But now Chinese are getting bigger. And the intention of China, we never know. Maybe they don't know. Chinese don't know. But we really need to maintain stability, at least maintaining military balance, which making the world stable. Prime Minister Abe's speech, especially the rationale for the free and open in the Pacific, came in 2016. That is a TICAT 6. That's a Tokyo International Conference on African Development in Nairobi, Kenya. As Japan bears the responsibility of fostering a confluence of the Pacific and the Indian Oceans and of Asia and Africa into place that values freedom, rules of law, market economy, free from force or coercion, and making it prosperous. So Japan want to work together with Africa in order to make the sea that connects the two continents into peaceful seas that are governed by the rule of law. This is a prototype of Japan's free Indo-Pacific. You know, Japan's idea is big, not only Asia, not only Northeast Asia, all Asia and the Pacific, Indian Ocean, Middle East, and Africa, and Europe. Why? Because, you know, the current world is globally very well connected. That means that only peace in the small region is impossible, especially the activity of China, activity of the United States, activity of Japan, activity of European country. That's not only in one area. That's clearly global. So that's good things somehow. But you know, some negative things is also coming through global connection. That is the world. By the way, let me go back to what is the EU-Japan SPA again. You know, that's clearly share the elements, what the EU-Japan try to attain, and Japan try to attain with African countries too. Value principle of democracy, rule of law, human rights, fundamental freedom. That's same with African country, and that means the same with all Asian country. Japan now try to talk very core countries for the attaining and free and open in the Pacific with the United States. Two major partners. That's one is Australia, and the other one is India. This is a foreign ministers, all countries last October, and after new Biden administration, now we're gonna have a new meeting, new foreign minister meeting in meeting too. So, but you know, that's just starting. Again, that's not NATO type alliance. By the way, India has a long history of non-alliance. I don't think India would like to join as a military alliance. Sometimes Chinese friends complain of, oh, that's containment against China. That's not. What kind of a meeting? That's, again, try to make sure the rule of law or the connectivity and securing sea lines of communication or freedom of navigation, making sure connectivity in the world, and try to the business as usual or more smooth flow of energy of energy flow from Middle East to Asia or vice versa. U.S. policy toward China is a little bit, image is changing from Trump to Biden. But I tell you, the core message to China didn't change, and the core stance on China didn't change at all. That's, again, the former Secretary of State, Pompeo, gave a speech last year. U.S. policy toward China as an engagement failed. Why? Because engagement policies expect China to become the democracy and respect the rule of law as China become richer. That's U.S. started to the closer economic relation with China. However, it didn't happen. So new idea is how to make China to the more cooperative rather than just the cooperative engagement. Probably combination with some limited, selective decoupling, and of course that's not containment. And this idea continues in new Biden administration. For example, left to the Hillary Clinton. This is a new national security advisor to the President Biden, Jake Sullivan. And Jake Sullivan and this guy is Kurt Campbell. Kurt Campbell is now appointed as the coordinator of Indo-Pacific in the National Security Council. When Kurt Campbell was Assistant Secretary of State of the East Asia and the Pacific, he visited the U.S. Embassy in Beijing to help this human rights lawyer who was facing a very risky situation in the country, and Kurt Campbell took him to the United States to protect. Anyway, in the Foreign Affairs magazine, Kurt Campbell and Jake Sullivan wrote a very impressive article that's clearly agreed with Pompeo that the U.S. engagement policy failed. So that's historical change of a U.S. policy toward China. But also they said U.S. is not going back to the containment because impossible to contain China. China has a more seriously connected to the world. So their way is engagement, but not cooperative engagement, but more competitive engagement. That is a world. And the goal is, again, that's not contain China. That's not try to confront with China, but influence China's behavior more cooperative to the international rule of law, and also trying to reduce risk. Same thing applied to the Russian attitude too. So now, I think U.S. experts on Asia, U.S. experts on Europe and Russia, somehow merging and sharing idea how to cope with this. I think it's time, the very good timing for the European country and Japan work together. We really need to work on not only Russia, not only China, but working together and trying to influence these two countries to be the more the collaboration, the cooperative world. That's not easy one. Easy to say. Takes a time and takes a very good skill over diplomacy and also military balance. Biden is a very skilled politician who spent 36 years in Senate, and he took a position, chairman of a Senate Foreign Relations, and he, as a vice president, he did his own very impressive diplomacy. This is a picture. Vice President Biden visited to Japan after earthquake in 2011. He visited the Sendai airport. Sendai airport is heavily hit by the tsunami, and these people actually lost their family. And Biden told them about he somehow understand how the family lost their friends and family. Of course, he experienced he lost his wife and the daughter, and eventually he lost his one of his sons when he was grown up, 46 years. So he respected human beings. He knew the sorrow of the people. That's why he respected human rights, people's dignity, and the democracy, because the democracy helps the individual and the individual's life. I think that's not so bad things to have this kind of leader, United States. But again, U.S. Power is very limited because, first of all, we experienced a very exceptional era after 1945 to the maybe 70s, 80s. That was a heyday of U.S. economic power and military power. But you know, now, unfortunately, U.S. power and the limitation is in decline. Well, so what we should do, what Europeans should do, what Japan should do, what the Asian neighbors should do? Answer is probably two-way. One is, all right, don't care. So we focus on our own individual country. That's America first, and Japan first, Latvia first, European first. The other one is probably we need to create a new cooperation, maintain the current existing the world order, especially the value of democracy, value of human beings, and also the value of international trade and economy. And many countries try to take a second one rather than first one, because it's more the effective for the attaining our own interests. That's individual prosperity, happiness, right, individual right. So especially the relatively small country, middle power country, for survival, we need to work together. If everybody is focusing on America first or individual country first, smaller country and relatively smaller country have a trouble. That is a history. So one lesson, EU, NATO, that's still effective, very important. And in Asia, US allied partner, bilateral alliance, US, Japan, US, South Korea, US, Australia, very important. But in Asia, we are trying to have a network such as Japan, US, India, Australia. And we try to have a closer cooperation with the ASEAN country, Southeast Eastern country. And you know, it's not so nice things to ask in all country, like an ASEAN country, relatively smaller country, choose either you go with China or United States. That's not so effective. Rather, we created the networking and the prosperity and the cooperation, and we don't force them to choose the US or China. Or in Europe, we don't force the allied partner to choose Russia or United States. That was a Cold War. But new world from now on is probably more complicated. But you know, we find a very wise way to cooperate. That is again free and open Indo-Pacific Japan. Japan's idea, but closely collaborating with the United States and the other countries. And European country, EU, is a very important because now world is the narrower. for example, just dealing with China doesn't make sense. We really need to deal with China and Russia and Europe and Japan and other Asia, and for the secured world and the prosperity and the rule of law. Again, that's I keep talking about this kind of things, but I'm very happy to exchange opinion and happy to answer any question. Thank you very much.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, as time is running, now we can come to the question and answer sessions. And I would like to kindly ask you to raise the Zoom virtual hand before you ask, or write your question inside of the chat. As I see the students is starting to prepare their questions, so maybe we can start. I see that Juan Pablo is raising his hand, so we can go.
Thank you, Alexandra. And first of all, thank you to Mr. Watanabe for his lecture. I have a brief question. Well, speaking of this cooperation platform with, I would say, like-minded partners in this international system, which is more contested right now. Mr. Watanabe, what would you think are the greatest challenges for this cooperation to occur? And which should be like the priority areas of this cooperation? Thank you.
Thank you for a good question. Yeah, a big challenge, big difficulty is, you experience a NATO. NATO is relatively easier because it's clearly to have a common enemy, Soviet Union somehow. And you guys actually are very complicated because the Baltic country was a part of Soviet Union first, and later joined the NATO. So I'm not going to the detail in the European history because you know better than me. But in Asia, Indo-Pacific, again, we keep saying we are not containing China, but also somehow try to influence the behavior of China. And also we don't want the too close relation between China and Russia. That's not so effective for us to influence over. So such kind of things is a very difficult to have a platform. So rather, we'd like to focus on the prosperous side. That's positive side. What kind of connectivity is good for the economic development, good for the mutual interest? That is sounds good, but not so effective to mobilize resources, because people tend to be the more serious about facing a threat, right? That is a challenge. And also a tyranny of distance. That's clearly between Latvia and Japan, because that's distance is so far. So, for example, without any common serious the tackling issue, not so easy to mobilize the resources for the cooperation. And good news is for example, Latvia is a part of EU. And the EU is now not so far away from Japan. So in the mind too, but the economic relation, business relation. So again, that is, my talk sounds easy, but practice is not so difficult. And sometimes kind of threat perception, like China and Russia is trying to break a current existing international rule, is incentive to mobilize this. I'm not talking about contain them or fight them, but create a common public goods in order to maintain our own prosperity. That's I'm trying to explain.
Okay, thank you very much. So do we have any other questions here? I assume at the moment there is no questions from the, I see. Okay, Ingvars Kudekins, you can please go.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Watanabe, for such an eye-opening presentation. It was really mindful to say that. But I have a question regarding China. Well, it is known that that China is trying to spread his influence and hegemony in the South China Sea. And I would like to know how the cooperation among the EU and Japan can tackle this upcoming problem.
Thank you for a good question. Actually, China is now trying to challenge to the territorial in South China Sea and the East China Sea, and even the border with India too. That's nature of a rising nation, and China doesn't believe the current existing rule doesn't fit to their own size. But that's clearly against the international norm. So one of the purpose U.S.-Japan alliance is trying to make sure the deter China's military adventurism. That's the only U.S. military can do that. So what Japan tried to do is make sure the presence in the U.S. in South China Sea and East China Sea. And China created some artificial islands and claimed their territory. And now they're expanding their territorial sea to the other neighbor countries like Philippines or Malaysia or Indonesia. And unfortunately, these countries are relatively small compared to Japan. So Japan is helping capacity building for the Coast Guard ability, for example. And that is a kind of a part of cooperation. Of course, that's not, we are directly challenging China, but trying to help our partners' ability by the capacity building for the Coast Guard technique and maritime security, or even the economic development too. I think that was effective. By the way, Japan has been working on seriously in the past. China's economic development too. Japan's contribution to the China's development was huge. Now many Japanese regret it, but I don't think that was totally bad. Somehow Japan maintained still some kind of confidence between the Japanese and the Chinese. So again, that's not just confrontation. Sending signal to China, what kind of a world we really wanted to make sure. And also that combination of liberalism and realism. Liberalism is trying to share some liberal idea to how we mean the China and other countries try to be the more richer and prosperous world. Also realist work. Somehow the military cooperation, the US and allied partner is deterring military adventurists. That combination is very important to send a message to China, especially in China's expensive activity in the South China Sea and East China Sea.
Thank you. And there is one more question from the chat, Mr. Watanabe, so I will read it out. A question about market relations in the region. The Japanese businesses have engaged with Chinese suppliers because of the competitive low costs. What can the Japanese government do to make the Southeast Asian suppliers comparatively more attractive in the Japanese market? Yeah,
that's good question for the business in a sense. Chinese market is attractive because a huge population. So that's very true. And but at the same time, Chinese behavior, sometimes government behavior is not securing the always opening up the market to the business outside of China. That we really need to be asking China to be the more open and transparent system. Otherwise, very risky for the business. So what we try to do is making alternative or in change of a supply chain. For example, in the past, we created the supply chain making China's parts or China's technologies very critical. And without cooperation with the Chinese market, the parts industry, we cannot make final products. But after COVID-19, we try to make sure the alternative and don't give China's the stopping the voices, don't give China some crucial role to stop supply chain. You know, that's not, again, containment, because, but at the same time, we maintain business relation with China and try to ask China to the cooperative manner is a more mutual benefit. Chinese people tend to win-win. But that is a win-win. I'm sure that China is growing and somehow try to show their own strength. But at the same time, Chinese are also realizing that without cooperation, very difficult to maintain their own very prosperous economy. That takes a time. So before China learn such kind of lesson, we maintain at least that's a realistic term. Balancing military. Don't let China to think of, oh, maybe military chance changing our world and China is more get richer. Fortunately, I'm sure you know the history. Japan was like that in the 1930s. Japan invaded China. Japan was a country who eventually challenged the United States, and Japan started the war with United States in 1941. It seems to me Chinese people are more wise and strategic to considering this kind of things. China never done suicidal warfare so far. So I keep telling my Chinese friends, you guys are much wiser than Japanese. So consider what is the best for China's future. That's a role for the not only Japan, but probably European partner to keep telling China. In order to do that, we maintain a good business relation, right? So such kind of a combination of keep business with China, but also sending somehow subtle and tough signal in order not to have a military conflict or Chinese military or unilateral action. That's complicated, but we could do that because we learned history.
Thank you, Mr. Watanabe, but as we are running out of the time, so there is a last question. So Mr. Watanabe, what do you think a country that does not have a big voice in world politics like Latvia? Could you initiate or promote this dialogue on cooperation? What will be our main role in that? And if I may add to that, so what is a Latvian role in Japan-EU connectivity in the future? And that will be also the last question for today.
Thank you very much. That's very good last question, because that's one of the reasons, connectivity or a middle power cooperation. Middle power, it doesn't have to be exactly the middle, but not only big power controls the world. That's not so good and that's not so effective. So Latvia has a somehow good framework that EU and NATO. But Japan is trying to connect the other way. If you have you have a route to the EU, you have a route to NATO. But sometimes that's not enough. So why don't we create some networking, more networking with the middle power? Middle power is between the US and China and Russia. All countries who have a stake, have a networking and sharing interest and sharing information. That's more power. By the way, the networking security is somehow proposed by the Center for New American Security. That's a US think tank who provided many experts in the European security and the Asian security in the Biden administration. President of CNAS was Richard Fontaine, who used to live in Japan and knows Asia very well, but he's an expert on the both European and Asian security. So networking give the relatively smaller country give a voice and somehow carrying a message. That's my sense.
Thank you for informative and self-providing talk. So we come to the end of the part of our presentation, and I would like to thank you again, Mr. Watanabe, for informative and interesting talk, and audience for the active participation. And hopefully the presentation will be beneficial for everybody, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, and I'm happy to answer any question if you can think of. You can email the probably the you can email to the Alexandra. Maybe you have my email and contact me, and happy to answer. Sometimes writing is easier than speaking.
Mr. Watanabe, thank you so much. It was very informative, very helpful to also to enrich and to expand our horizon. So thank you, and certainly we should continue, be it in a written format, but we will be more happy to welcome and host you in Riga. So let's keep our cooperation going. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Spreads. And of course, you're familiar with Tokyo, so come to our institute if you have a chance to, and I definitely go to.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Watanabe, Professor Spruce, and Ms. Falkova, and also to other speakers and participants. Thank you very much. But the most important is Ria, who makes these events possible. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you as well. Thank you for cooperation. So let's continue also institutional engagement. Thank you.
Yes, this is a start.
Absolutely.
Our cooperation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you.